Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the A to Z Poll podcast. My name is Zachary Siegel, and we have a very amazing and interesting week to go over, and some stuff to talk about. Um, so first things first, we got our new iteration of the CFP poll, which will bring us right into our first point. But before I go over that, if you like this kind of content, if you like college football, if you want to stay informed, if you want interesting opinions and takes, go give me a follow, give me a subscription. Go find me on Twitter at Zach_Siegel32. You can go find me on TikTok. You can go find me just about anywhere that use social media. Enough shilling though. We have our newest edition of the CFP uh, poll, right? The ranking of the top 25 that is given to us by the people who determine who goes to the college football playoff. And so, as we normally do, we're going to go over the top five things pertaining to this list. As well as I would like to go have just a little bit of a discussion about the Heisman race, seeing as we're getting kind of down into that. And we'll talk a little bit about Conference Championship Week, but that will happen pretty organically as we go over these points that I would like to make. Now, for those of you who have not seen the list yet, it reads as follows. We're going to start from 25 at Memphis. So Memphis took a big win this week against Tulane. So they have gotten themselves the number 25th spot, followed by another AAC companion in Army, who will be competing for the AAC championship. Then you have Colorado. You have Syracuse, the team that just took down Bama this week. Illinois, UNLV competing for a Mountain West championship. Missouri, don't know why they're there. BYU sold themselves out of a Big 12 championship earlier this season. Clemson competing in the ACC, followed by 16 and 15 being Iowa State and Arizona State, the two teams competing for that playoff spot out of the Big 12. Number 14 is South Carolina. Now we got kind of our bubble teams in South Carolina, Ole Miss, Miami, and Alabama, followed by number 10, Boise State, number 9, Indiana, number 8, SMU, number 7, Tennessee, number 6, after losing that terrible game to, well, not terrible by football lover standards, but terrible game for Ohio State standards, terrible the game to Michigan. Number 5, Georgia. Number 4, Notre Dame. Number 3, Penn State, who will be competing against Oregon in the Big Ten championship. Number 2, Texas, who will be taking on number 5, Georgia in the SEC championship. And to round it out, as I just mentioned, Oregon, being the number 1 team in the CFP, the only undefeated team left in the whole thing, the only undefeated team still kicking after these last couple teams have fallen in recent weeks. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is the list, right? The thing that I just talked about is now, with the regular season being done, with week 14 coming and going, outside of some crazy championship weekend scenarios, we just about have our top our playoff bracket, right? So if everything were to go as follows, it would be 1 Oregon, 2 Texas, 3 SMU, 4 Boise State, 5 Penn State, 6 Notre Dame, 7 Georgia, 8 Ohio State, 9 Tennessee, 10 Indiana, 11 Alabama, and then 12th would be Arizona State. Now, at this point, that's pretty much the first thing that I just want to talk about, right? It doesn't really matter, right? So we know that we know even with losses, right? Oregon, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame can't lose at this point because they don't have a conference. Georgia, even Ohio State also can't lose. But even with championship conference losses between Oregon, Texas, Penn State, and Georgia, you're still looking at an absolute shoo-in, right? There's no one doubting that even these teams even Georgia taking a third loss in the SEC championship, no one is doubting that they're one of the best 12 teams in the country and that they're going to be in the playoff. Okay, great. It's the next teams that we need to talk about. And the first one of those teams that I want to talk about is kind of a group of four teams, and that's going to be the bubble. That's going to be uh, the Alabama through South Carolina kind of discussion, where a lot of people, with 9-3, three-loss Alabama, were very upset that they were chosen over, especially 10-2 Miami, but 9-3 Ole Miss and 9-3 South Carolina. Now, I would like to say a couple things about this. One, the last few weeks, I have really been harping on the committee for not respecting head-to-head matchups, and I think that's where the conversation between South Carolina and Alabama needs to live and die. I know it was close. I know that South Carolina is probably playing better football right now. Maybe playing better football right now, playing some of the better football in the country right now. But Alabama and South Carolina played 60 minutes of football, and at the end of the game, Alabama won. It's as plain and simple as that. Um, they you talk about some like opponents, you can talk about best win, but at the end of the day, it kind of where it lives and dies with me. Unless there was like like Jalen Milroe, or sorry, not Jalen Milroe, but like LaSell or Norris, the quarterback for South Carolina didn't play, right? He didn't play, then yeah, okay, I could say maybe there's an argument based off some other things that you could put South Carolina because they're a different team than they played Alabama, but that wasn't the case. These teams faced each other at full strength. Alabama beat South Carolina. That is where it lives and dies with me. Next, Ole Miss, right? So, like opponents, right? A lot of the arguments I've been hearing about them is really Ole Miss has gotten the least amount of arguments for being above Bama, but one of the main arguments that I've heard about them is, they beat Georgia worse than Bama beat Georgia. And what I would say to that is they also lost to a worse team. I believe it was the Joel Klatt show that said that I found this out that Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky was the only not just SEC win but Power Four win that Kentucky had all season, which is a pretty ridiculous thing to be the only loss that season. Now, look, I know they spanked Georgia, but Bama beat Georgia too, and I just at this point think that if you're looking at worst losses and overall team, I said this earlier. Actually, I went back and watched some of my old podcasts from earlier this year, and in Week 8, I said that Tennessee has the talent and the firepower to beat anyone in the country, and I think they proved that in games like in games beating Georgia, but in games where they lose to Florida and Kentucky and stuff, they have a bit of complacency. And I said this in the beginning. In Week 8, you can go back and look. In Week 8, I said that Ole Miss was going to have there was a weird level of complacency coming out of Ole Miss, coming out of Oxford, and I said that it's going to kill them at some point. And look at that. Now we're sitting here. They're this close. They're just inches away from the college football playoff. And it was their complacency and like that Trey Harris dropping in Kentucky, in them just having a complete and utter collapse at the end against Florida. I mean, and now look, Florida is probably a better team with DJ Lagway than they were, in the beginning of the year when they got to face Miami. But they still, if Ole Miss wants to be one of the best teams in the country, that's a game that they're going to have to win, and they simply are not winning those games. And I mean, they also lost to, you talk about like opponents. They lost to LSU. Alabama beat LSU, right? Ole Miss seemed this whole year to just, you know, not live up to expectations, which last year, with only four teams making the CFP, I would say, maybe that's just a little bit unfortunate. But this year, like last year, we wouldn't even be talking about 2 9-3 teams for the college football playoff. We'd be talking about, they just wouldn't even be in the conversation more. But now that we have a 12-team playoff, it's exciting because even these games, even with a couple losses, these games still mean something. And finally, Miami. Now I'm going to say Miami for 1 second. I'm going to say Miami for 1 second because the next part of it that I kind of want to talk about is what happens if SMU loses to Clemson. Because right now, right, we talked about the college football playoff, right? SMU would be the third seed. If SMU, just say Boise State wins, SMU loses to Clemson. If Boise State loses, they're out. They're a group of five team. That's just how it works. We don't really have to worry about that. And UNLV would be the 12th seed. But if SMU loses, a lot of people are saying they're 11-1. How could they not, win? How could they not be, um, the team that? How could they not be in, playing an extra game, right? It's not like they didn't play. Uh, it's not like they didn't go the whole season how they were supposed to and win those games. Um, and to that, I would say there's strength of schedule. Now that's kind of a whole ACC problem. But if they lose, their two toughest games of the season against, but they lost to BYU and they lost to BYU and then losing to Clemson, that would change the whole landscape. And now you're having to look at where the reason I wanted to say them was because now you're looking at not only Alabama versus Miami, but you're looking at Alabama versus SMU as well, right? If SMU were to lose, Miami's still kind of completely out of it already. If they lose, the conversation isn't Alabama versus Miami; it's Alabama versus SMU, right? Because at that point, the winner, Arizona State or Iowa State, would take the fourth seed. Boise State would take the third seed, and Clemson, the ACC, would be representing the 12th seed, the fifth highest ranked conference champion. And so, you looking at their resumes, it just turns into is SMU is a two-loss SMU team better than a three-loss Alabama team? And I think at 11-1 versus 9-3, we're not really thinking about that because one's in a conference championship and one is on the verge of not making the playoffs. Well, I think SMU is a lot closer to not making the playoffs than we realize. Now, we can get into this conversation last year is do they deserve to be in the playoff? Maybe. And I think you can look at that a couple ways. One, strength of schedule. Alabama has had a much harder schedule than SMU, and that's just a fact, right? It's not no one's arguing that the SEC isn't tougher than the ACC. What people are arguing is that you can only play who you play, and that this extra game shouldn't hurt them. And I'm going back and forth on this. And in one capacity, I'm saying, why should your success and the ability to play an extra game hurt you? On the other hand, I'm saying, which is the better team? Like, I don't know if I see SMU, making a real run. I see Alabama making a real run. Is SMU beating a team like Georgia? Are they coming even close? Probably not. Alabama did beat Georgia. Now, given that game again, I think Georgia comes out on top, but that's neither here nor there because they didn't that first time. And again, head-to-head matchups matter. And we saw this earlier. Georgia beat the brakes off of Clemson at the beginning of the season. Now, I'm willing to honestly ignore that stat line pretty aggressively, but if SMU loses this game against Clemson, that means that they have lost their only real ranked games of the season. Their only games that were even at all tough, and the majority of and from what I saw, the majority of their roster their schedule wasn't even against that good of ACC competition. And well, I do think that I do have this kind of whole theory that in a few years SMU will be more of a powerhouse program, especially now that they can do the thing that got them the death penalty so many years ago. Which is just get the big spenders in Dallas to spend all that money. I think that this year we're just not quite there yet. And I would love to see them in the playoff. I think that would be great for the advocacy of these kind of the second two, the Big 12 and the ACC and the power conferences. But I just think the committee would not allow SMU into this. Now, I think the only way that SMU loses and is still in the playoff is if you have Boise State lose. If Boise State were to lose to UNLV, right, that would be actually a very similar chain reaction to if SMU lost, right? Everyone would shift up one. The You would get either Miami, Ole Miss, or South Carolina in. You would get uh, and you would just move like the ACC would then just take the 12, the Big 12 would take the 4, and the Mountain West would take the 3. Now, but if the Mountain West were to lose, right, if Boise State were to lose this game and Boise State were to lose this game and everything else goes accordingly, right? SMU wins, Clemson wins, then you're a very similar chain of reaction is happening, right? Boise State is out, Alabama moves up one, to the 10th. Say Miami, just say they keep it in order, right? Miami, Ole Miss, or South Carolina, whoever they deem to be more worthy, moves up to the 11th. They then become the 11th seed. And then you have UNLV as the 12th seed, Big 12 uh, as the fourth seed, and SMU in the ACC as the third seed. But now, what happens if both Boise State and SMU lose? Now, that is an interesting conversation because now you don't have to have that decision between SMU and Alabama. You have to have the decision SMU versus Ole Miss and South Carolina. Now, having that conversation, SMU versus Miami and South Carolina, I think is a very, very interesting one. So this is going to bring me to my third point, right? In my bullet points that I wrote down, I said, are we prepared to give Boise State the third seed if Clemson or Miami win? I don't know why I said Miami. If Clemson wins, I think that in order, which I'm the reason why I would be so against giving Boise State the third seed is because they are a Group of Five team, and I genuinely don't think that the Group of Five is going to compete at the same way that these other schools that are power schools are competing, even in the ACC, even in the Big 12. I know they held their own against Oregon, but that Oregon team also got taken a run for by Idaho. So do with that as you will in the beginning. And then they went on and beat Ohio State. So I think that Oregon, that game against Oregon is a completely different conversation. Now, but so taking us down this hypothetical conversation line, Boise State loses, UNLV wins, they are the 12th seed of the playoffs. The Big 12 and also SMU loses, right? So now UNLV is the 12th seed. Clemson is the 4th seed. And the winner of Arizona State, Iowa State takes the 3 seed. So now, Boise State, you're out. You're done. Sorry. 11-2 in the Mountain West is unfortunately simply just not good enough to make the FBS national championship. SMU, on the other hand, they now have a bigger argument. But where do they fall is the biggest question. And I think, you kind of just have to move everyone up. So Indiana moves up to 8. Alabama moves from 11 to 9. And then, Boise State goes out of the picture. And then you're talking for the 11th seed about a 4-team bubble that makes up Miami, SMU, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. Now, along this line of thought, South Carolina and Ole Miss. So first, let's talk. So we did this originally the first way. So we talked about Alabama versus their SEC opponents. Now we'll talk about SMU versus their SEC opponent, Miami. I think you just have to put SMU over Miami. They have less conference losses. Neither one had a particularly hard schedule. And, SMU has one more win. Their strength of schedule is comparable. Whether or not you believe that Miami would beat SMU overall, SMU this year just has not lost in conference. And I think that means something, right? Miami has had every opportunity to be undefeated at this point, and they have just simply not been able to do that, despite the fact they've had such a good offense. It seems like that build of defense that Mario Cristobal has put together just could not handle the pressure once it came down to the end of the season. Maybe that comes down to age, maybe that comes down to experience, maybe that comes down to general cohesion, that with the cracks in the armor, we just didn't see them until it was way too late. But I think at this point, it's just very clear, cut and dry that Miami does not have the edge over SMU at this point. Moving on. Now you talk about SMU versus Ole Miss and SMU versus South Carolina. And I'm willing to give the nod over Ole Miss more than I'm willing to give it over South Carolina right now, even though Ole Miss is ranked one higher. Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky really, in my opinion, hurts, right? The one loss that SMU has so far is by the 18th ranked team in the country and one that was undefeated up until 3 weeks ago. Ole Miss has dropped a couple, right? They've dropped every game that they've dropped. They should have won. Without a doubt. You can argue if SMU really should have beaten BYU. Every game that Ole Miss has lost is a game that they should have won. Ole Miss does have a harder strength of schedule than SMU, and I truly believe that. And if I'm being completely frank, I think that SMU should be. I think that SMU would lose to Ole Miss head to head. But I've been really wrong about Ole Miss this year. And I think that because they have three losses, and for the reasons why I don't think they'd be above Alabama, I don't think they would be above SMU. I think that SMU has proven more not losing in their conference outside of potentially losing the conference championship than Ole Miss has had losing to the absolute bottom barrel of their conference. I think that means more. Um, that being said, there's another question of how will the committee respond to that? And I think the committee responds to that by I don't think the committee would look at that and necessarily agree with me if I'm being honest. I think the committee is pretty dead set on SMU has to win or they're not in. I think the committee would look at Ole Miss, look at them taking down Georgia, and say there is more of an opportunity for excitement here, and there is more of an opportunity for Ole Miss to take down Georgia than there is for SMU to take down Georgia. Therefore, we are going to put Ole Miss in. I don't end up really thinking that South Carolina is part of this conversation, despite the fact that I think right now, if South Carolina and Ole Miss played, South Carolina would win surely because of how good of football they are playing right now. I don't think that Ole Miss is playing with that level of passion, and I fully am willing to blame Lane Kiffin for that. We are going to get if we can go in circles with this, but if we are going to get to an Ole Miss versus SMU um, style conversation, it's going to be a very similar conversation to the Florida State versus Alabama game, Alabama debate last year. Florida State was way more deserving. Did not lose in their conference. Went undefeated that year. Deserved to be in the playoff more than one loss Alabama. Alabama was the better team. Plain and simple. They were just simply the better team. And anybody with eyes could see that. This is exactly the same thing. SMU has not lost in conference. Mississippi has lost a couple bad games, but anybody with eyes can see that Ole Miss is just simply a better team than SMU. Now, which way the committee goes, I'm not sure. Will they value their conference play and want to keep, some sort of congruity within the conferences, keep some level of prestige in the ACC, giving them the nod, or will they give Ole Miss, the sheer talent nod? Um, I'm not sure, but my gut tells me that Ole Miss would make it. I honestly, Ole Miss or South Carolina, and maybe even Miami would make it over SMU just because of committee bias. Um, and if I be completely honest, I'm not sure which way I'd go. I think I would believe in SMU just because I don't believe that this extra game should hurt you. But at the same time, if you can't handle this extra game, how are you going to handle yourself in playoffs? So I'll go back and forth on it for probably weeks, and I'll ultimately not really get any answers to it unless they do lose, they do make it in, and we see what happens after that. All right, so I kind of lumped the first 1 through 3 points in with one another. The next thing that I want to talk about is going to turn into a super long episode, but it's been a while since I've gotten to, really dive into some college football. So this is really exciting for me. Um, Number 4, Ohio State versus Michigan. Should Ohio State be lower? I mean, how did Michigan even pull off this 20-point upset? I think that Joel Klatt articulated it perfectly. I listened to his take and I listened to Josh Pate's take, and they kind of all end up with the same concept of Michigan played their game. And Joel Klatt said a very interesting line of they got him in a phone booth and got into a fist fight in a phone booth, and that's exactly what they did. I've heard the term boa constrictor, right? I used it to talk about Illinois earlier this year. I used it to talk about Iowa State earlier this year. But it's generally been referred to as what Michigan did last year. And that's what they did this year. They held on just tight enough to not let Ohio State do anything. Now, on the other hand, Ohio State didn't try to do anything. I think if Ohio State airs it out, isn't afraid to make mistakes, and tries everything and anything, they are just going to outluck them, right? There's nobody, especially with Will Johnson out, there is nobody on that Michigan team that will come even close to being able to cover Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, or Cordell Tate. I truly believe that. That being said, they didn't try anything, right? The first half of the game, they kind of go in there, they try their best, they take a couple shots, but it didn't work out, and they immediately were just too scared to do anything, right? We saw them run it 3 times and miss a field goal late in the game. That really, at that point, you felt okay, game's over. And not to mention, like, and I hate to put it on one player because it's kind of his fault, kind of not his fault, but Will Howard played the worst game of his season, maybe his career. That was, I mean, he couldn't place a ball. He couldn't hit the old cliche. Couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. He had himself a heck of a bad game, and I just don't. I was talking about it when I was writing, like when I was writing the script for this and thinking about it. Like, I get why Ohio State fans are so mad. Like, obviously, it's your rivalry game. It's the game you want to win more than anything. But I heard somebody talked about the other day. I think it was someone on TikTok talked about the other day that they thought that they heard an Ohio State fan say, if we don't beat Michigan, our season's over. I don't care if we lose the college football playoff. I don't want to. I want us to beat Michigan. And I thought to myself, like, that's ridiculous. Like, look, I get it. A rivalry's a rivalry, but like, you would rather lose the national championship than beat a team that's not even competing for it. And yes, that is the culture surrounding this game. So to go in as an Ohio State fan, I can just imagine how frustrating this is to go in pound for pound being the better team, except for your front five and your build-in offensive line versus maybe the best D line in the country. You're just better than them. And kind of the same criticism that people give when, oh, you couldn't establish a pass game because you didn't run. They couldn't establish a run game because they couldn't pass because they played the game within the pocket the whole time, within the shoulders of the guards. That's where they played the game. And Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are going to have to realize that, like, I'm not saying they should have replaced Will Howard, but they should have recognized where he was struggling way early on. I recognize where he was struggling. It's if the casual observer, just someone watching the game, is seeing your team's problems like a flashing like beacon, like the welcome to Vegas lights, I don't understand how you're not seeing and addressing these. What people are you said you didn't want to take you played the game like you didn't want to take risks. This was the biggest risk. You lost the game. I think every fan would have rather seen you take risks, would have rather seen you put the ball in the hands of your playmakers and allow them to mess up, allow the people, the players that you as a program through NIL have spent millions on. I bet your fans would rather you see that give them opportunities than to do what you did, which was nothing, which is roll over and not play the game on your terms. All right. Slightly out of breath. That got heated. And again, I'm not even a Michigan or Ohio State fan. That was, but I'm getting mad for Ohio State fans because and honestly, after doing all that, I understand why they want Ryan Day gone. Right? We've all seen the meme. He's 44-1 against every team that's not named Michigan, or 44-6 or something like that against every team not named Michigan. He's 1-4 against every team named Michigan. It's really funny to me um, how this is all played out. That being said, this is an Ohio State team that I now think will take more risks. It's just unfortunately 60 minutes too late. All right. I'm going to move on from the Ohio State Michigan game. I've said pretty much all I wanted to say about it. I'm sure I will bring it up in another later episode. But number five, and to kind of round out what I wanted to talk about this week, is something that I haven't really heard a lot of buzz about. That is Texas, the number two team in the country, the team playing in the SEC championship. Now, this game will be played on Saturday. I think it's like at like 7 or 4:30 or something like that. It's not the last game. It's not the first game. But Texas has no quality wins this year. They really do not have any good wins this year. The ranked opponents that they have faced this year are Michigan, not ranked anymore. Texas A&M, not ranked anymore. And Georgia, whom they lost to pretty badly. I talked about it, a few weeks ago when it happened, but I guess what? A month and a half ago when it happened. Wow, time flies. That's what happens when you have a really fun and awesome college football season. But Texas just hasn't performed against good teams or done anything good. Like it almost feels like I've been bamboozled. I've been tricked. Right? I don't know what's happening with this Texas team because they haven't had their metal tested, and when they have, it didn't work out. Like Steve Sarkisian is a very creative head coach. He's going to have to be very creative if he's going to take down Georgia, especially after the first time. And Kirby Smart's arguably the best head coach in football right now. It's not even that much of an argument right now. Maybe Dan Lanning has a case, but until Dan Lanning is back-to-back national champion, I'm going to give it to Kirby Smart right now. Kirby Smart had the thing is he didn't even play that well, right? Like he didn't play at all, but Georgia didn't even play that amazing against Texas the first time. Texas beat the brakes out of themselves. Like I think they would have had a better chance just, you know, lining up against Bevo. Let me collect myself. Texas scares me not because I think Texas is really good and they're going to run everyone over. I think Texas scares me because I think that they could have the potential to get absolutely annihilated. I don't think necessarily think that will happen, but especially with the frequency in which Sark has been willing to just take out Quinn Ewers from the game, it's going to be a little hard to get some confidence, get some momentum. That kind of short leash. It almost reminds me of early Cade Klubnik versus DJ Uwungalai, where Dabo was kind of not letting either make mistakes. It's not that quite that drastic, but it leads to a lot of losses and it leads to bigger problems. And I just want to say it right now. It would not shock me if Texas was an early bounce against a team maybe that we're not totally expecting them to lose to. I think Texas is a very talented team, and I think that there's a lot of teams right now. I think the beauty of this season is outside of Oregon, right? They're the only undefeated team. We've seen a lot of losses, and I love that, right? I love the chaos. I love it all. It's so much fun. It's so amazing. But unless Texas gets like a Notre Dame or an Indiana in the first round, I'm not super confident in what they're doing. Even in Arizona State or in Iowa State, I'm not super confident, especially since it's from the conference they just lost. That's just it to me spells comedic relief, spells irony, full circle moment of them leaving their conference and then playing and then playing and then losing to that conference in the playoffs, having that whole kind of superiority complex. If I'm being honest, I'm not really expecting them to beat Georgia. I could be wrong. And frankly, I almost want to be wrong a little bit. Like I think Texas being good would be awesome, but from what I've seen this year, this team doesn't seem to handle adversity all that well, and I just don't know how that is going to play out. Like I think they'll be better next year when they have to rely on Arch, right? Assuming he doesn't transfer, obviously. When they have to rely on Arch Manning, they have to rely on one quarterback. I think they're going to be better. But because they have options at quarterback and they have, arguably two of the top 10 quarterbacks in the playoffs, two of the top five quarterbacks, 5 to 10 quarterbacks in the playoffs, I think that's going to be more of a detriment to them than anything. Again, they are very talented, and we'll see. Maybe there's like a double trick, and they're just pretending that they haven't been as good all year. They played Michigan the same way that Greg Maddux pitched to people in the regular season, right? Gave them what they wanted to hit to confuse them later on. But right now, I think that it's going to be. I'm not optimistic for Tech. If I'm a betting man, I'm not betting on Texas. Um, all right, so that is going to wrap it up for kind of my thoughts and reactions of this newest iteration of the college football playoff, what the bubble looks like, and just kind of things happening right now. We definitely need. I'm definitely going to be watching um, the championship weekend. Whether it be from my phone or in my house or wherever, I will be paying attention to those championship games. Um, Boise State plays tomorrow against UNLV. I believe the game's at 8. And speaking of Boise State, so the last thing I want to get into before ending this, right? Like I said, this is gonna be a long episode, and this is more of a fun episode than I've had doing in a very long time. But as we my Heisman race right now, and so this is my Heisman race according to me. So not how I think it will play out, but how I think it should play out, and I'm explain why. So number 5, I actually have a tie. Hot start, right? But I have a tie between Cam Scatabo and Caleb Johnson. I think they have both put their teams on the map. I think if I had to make them 5A and 5B, it would be Cam Scatabo 5A and Caleb Johnson 5B. But both teams have been the focal points of their offense for their programs. And the only reason I think I would put Cam Scatabo slightly higher is because Arizona State is playing for a conference championship right now. That's really the only reason. And Iowa just simply is not. But neither one I think are going to New York, and it's kind of 3 through 1 that are the most important. But can't get to 3 without 4. So number 4, I think Dillon Gabriel. He's the quarterback on the best team, right? Whether or not you actually believe Oregon is the best team or not, they are the number 1 ranked team. They are undefeated. They had a 12-0 season, and they are in the Big Ten championship. They are. He is the quarterback for that team. Generally speaking, the quarterback for the best team is a Heisman finalist. Also, Dillon Gabriel's been playing out of his mind. He's played football this year in ways that I didn't really think he would play football. He's used his feet a lot more. He's made those deep throws. He's threaded the needle, and he's even had those soft touch passes that we've known him to be so well adapted to. He's played to his strengths and beyond, and I think that is phenomenal for Dillon Gabriel. And I think there's a lot of seasons, in the last 10 years that he could have won it. Unfortunately, not this year. Number 3, the person who is usually a little interchangeable for 3 and 4, but that's going to be Cam Ward. And the reason I gave Miami's Cam Ward the nod, because Miami has led the most efficient and highest scoring / yardage / everything offense this season. I think Cam Ward. I think if you took Cam Ward and put him on any team, they are instantly in the conversation for the playoffs. Cam Ward has been, the way that he moves, it's like water, right? He just flows through defenders, and he doesn't even really look like he's sprinting half the time. And then you realize, oh, he's pulling away from cornerbacks, right? So Cam Ward has played out of his mind. But something fun about this year is that the top 2 players, which I think you already know who they're going to be, are not are not quarterbacks, which is something we don't see very often. And that is going to be in the form of Ashton Jeanty and Travis Hunter. Number 2, I put Travis Hunter. Number 1, I put Ashton Jeanty, and here's why. Travis Hunter is top 15 in most, not all, some he's not even top 100, but in most cornerback and wide receiver meaningful statistics. Ashton Genty is dead on number one ranked in every single rushing stat, except I think yards per carry, which he's like top three. Every single rushing stat, Ashton Genty is number one, and it's not even close. The number one rusher in the league this year is Ashton Genty. The number two rusher this year, Ashton Genty after contact. I know he's playing in the Mountain West, but if we're gonna really take the Mountain West into consideration like that for the Heisman, why are they even ranked in the top 10? If you're gonna put them higher than anybody in the Big 12 and most teams in the ACC and even a good large portion of the Big 10 and SEC, then I think there needs to be something taken into consideration because either the Mountain West is a formidable foe or they're not. And I don't think we can pick and choose about that. I think what Ashton Genty has done this year has been revolutionary for the running back position, which is also something we're seeing in the NFL with players like Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. Ashton Genty will be a first round draft pick. So will Travis Hunter. But I think that Ashton Genty is more elite at his one thing than Travis Hunter's combination of being really good at two things, if that makes sense. Now what I think will happen is I think Travis Hunter will win, but I think the people in New York will be Ashton Genty, Travis Hunter, and Cam Ward. Obviously, the media wants like Shadur there. I think if Shadur Sanders made it to New York, that would be a shame, to say the least, because that would mean that either Ashton Genty or Cam Ward or Travis Hunter wouldn't be there. And I think all three of those players are way more deserving than Shadur Sanders, but all three will be first round draft picks next year. And this was just my thoughts on the Heisman race as it's coming down. Actually, in my notes, I spelled Heisman, the classic HEI2MAN for Ashton Genty. Um, just fanboying a little bit over a generational rusher. All right. That being said, that is that is all I got, and this is gonna be one of the last weekends that I can say it until really bowl season. But last weekend where we'll have consistent Saturday games. But if you made it this far, thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Who should be the Heisman winner? And if there's anything else you notice about this list, and go watch some football. I hope your team wins, and I'll see you guys. See you guys next week.